Here at Bay City Roller Fan Events, we come across all kinds of really cool things. Recently, we've come across a biography about Ian Mitchell that was written, I'm going to assume maybe late 90s, mid to late 90s, by Kathy Saxon. And it's called Ian Mitchell's Dedication, One Man's Rock and Roll Odyssey. So we're going to read aloud from it. Story time. This is totally out of print, unavailable. It doesn't even come up in a Google search. Um, so we thought that we would maybe read it in bits and pieces and put it up for people who may want to listen. We realize we haven't done a podcast in a while. It's getting a little bit harder to set them up now that things have opened up a bit and people are getting back on with life and with schedules and things like that. But we're still interested in doing them, and if people have any ideas or if you want to do a podcast, you can certainly reach out to us. We love doing them, but things are getting back to normal, hopefully, and you know it is what it is, and it was what it was, and it was wonderful at the time, and we certainly loved keeping you company as you kept us company as well during lockdown. So before we start, I'm going to read the author's notes that she had in the beginning of the book. And here we go. Like thousands of other people, I was caught up in the phenomenon known as roller mania during the 70s. I fell in love with the music and subsequently the men who played it. I first spoke to Ian when he found out through a mutual friend that I was in tears over something that another roller had said to me during a chat on the internet. I was resistant to speak to him because my emotions were so raw, but Ian had insisted and the call was made. One thing that I simply wasn't prepared for was the comforting and sympathetic tone that Ian took with me. It was such a relief to hear his understanding voice that I broke down in tears again and couldn't even speak for several minutes. That was only the prelude to our relationship. When we first met at Absolute Roller Fest 96, we hit it off immediately. His charm was the first thing to strike me. He has a way of making you feel like you're the most important person in the room. His blatant honesty was something that I had to get used to, though. He has a way of speaking his mind that can be disconcerting, but refreshing at the same time. A person always knows where they stand with Ian. Since then, Ian and his lovely wife, Wendy, have welcomed me into their home and into their lives. It has been such a joy for me to get to know the man behind the mask. His quick wit and unique mastering of the Blarney has secured him a place in my heart. As if that wasn't enough, without knowing it, Ian has granted me a lifelong dream. I had been writing since I was a child, and in true roller mania fashion, I had dreamed of the day when I could write an account of their lives. After 20-plus years, that day has come, and it was well worth the wait. There is no way I can express my gratitude for Ian for taking the chance on me with this biography. The precious gift that he has given to me by sharing his amazing life with me is something that can never be measured or bought or even repaid. All I can offer in return is an inadequate thank you. I love Ian dearly, and I hope that this biography will show you the part of him that I love the most, his heart. Kathy Saxon. Ian Mitchell's Dedication, One Man's Rock and Roll Odyssey by Kathy Saxon. Take me back. In the quiet town of Downpatrick in Northern Ireland, a young lad wanders up the darkened street to watch the North Star on its seasonal rise and fall over one particular house. The continual motion of the night sky calls to him, shows him the path that his life will be taken. Even at the tender age of 10, Ian Mitchell feels a stirring of a soul that will one day take him around the world. Mary and Alan Mitchell led a simple life with their two sons, Ian and Tony, their daughter Rita, and their two foster daughters, Kathleen and Geraldine. Their home was typical of all the others in the town of Downpatrick. Mary worked as a head waitress, and Alan served in the Royal Armed Forces. But most of the jobs in town at the time were limited to either Talmac, the local leather factory that shipped out leather goods all over the world, or at the cotton mill at Killyleagh, a town neighboring Downpatrick. Many of the people in town followed the same path as their parents, working in the leather factory or the cotton mill, and lived in the same houses that their parents had once owned, continuing the tradition laid down by their grandparents, and that frightened Ian more than anything. It was the mid-60s, and the sign at the town reads, "Welcome to Downpatrick, population 2,200 people." Even though it's the burial place of St. Patrick, it was a quiet place where people leave their doors unlocked and coal was delivered to their homes. This is the place where Ian would wander off for days at a time with some of the other boys to go fishing or hunting with traps and catapults. No one worried after them. There was no need, but Ian's heart was far from peaceful. While he had many friends with which to spend his time, there was no one that he was particularly close to. Ian always knew he was different. He was a huge daydreamer, and at 12 or 13 years of age he would while away the hours writing science fiction short stories or experimenting with a little lab set up in his room, making strange and curious things happen with electricity. All in all, it was a splendid childhood without worries or care. Still, there was one thing that troubled Ian. As he walked through the town each day, he knew that most of the people there would go to school, some off to college, then they would go into a trade, get married, have their kids, and most likely live in the same house that their parents had lived in, and that scared the hell out of him. I've got to get out of here. I've got to get out of here. This place is nowhere. This is nothing. I can't live here anymore. It was then that Ian decided to take guitar lessons. His imaginative mind and creative talents were only beginning to surface, and the guitar was a logical place for his inquisitive nature. It offered him the escape that he sought as well as a channel for his thoughts, but he was far from patient. He was the type of person that wants everything now. He wanted to learn fast, so he paid for a week's worth of guitar lessons, learned the basic chords and said thanks very much, and then struck out on his own. During his early teens, he spent a lot of time at the local youth club, and as his creative ideas began to take a firmer hold, he teamed up with a fellow musician named Damian McKee. They found a mutual kinship in their love for the guitar and struck up a friendship that would last for many, many years to come. Ian's gift for the blarney was also becoming finely hewn at this time, and one of his first conquests was the organizer of the local youth club. There was a band that used the youth club for rehearsals, and knowing that would be the perfect spot to practice, Ian managed to persuade the organizer of the club to toss the other band out so that he and Damien could use the rehearsal room. To this day, Ian can't recall just what he had said to the organizer, but he and Damien reaped the rewards now, as they had access to a PA system, a drum kit, and backlighting. With the addition of a fellow named McGee on the drums, Ian's first band was complete. The trio started off by learning 2 songs, Whiskey in the John by Thin Lizzy and Steeler's Wheels Stuck in the Middle with You. With those 2 songs well rehearsed, they were ready for their first gig. They played those 2 songs one night for an hour and a half. They just kept on playing from one song to the next, then back again. For an encore, they played Whiskey in the John and Stuck in the Middle with You. Over and over, the 2 songs played, and at age 15, they knew they had made it. They were immortal. No one could touch them. They knew that everyone loved them, and if they didn't, those people were just shrugged off as not having a clue about great music. As time went on, Ian and Damien went off to college together, but their music was hardly forgotten. The repertoire of songs grew. McGee was replaced on the drums by Damien's brother Terry, and a 4th member was added, who also happened to be Damien's brother. Colin took the place as the bass guitarist, and the young City Stars were born. Cecil Thompson became the manager of the band, as well as the promoter, and soon the young City Stars were in demand throughout Ireland. An automobile became their second home. It wasn't usual for the band to be playing down in Dublin, jump in the car after the gig, and drive all the way back up to Downpatrick so that Ian and Damien could attend college the next day. Concert halls, bars, and clubs were filled with faceless people, the air layered thick with smoke and the ever-present smell of bodies and alcohol. The teenage band members arrived late that afternoon to set up their equipment, then took the stage, played their set, then started packing up once more to move on. They never stayed in place long enough to build any sort of friendships. The only names they knew were those of the club owners, and even those were forgotten over time. It was a nomadic lifestyle with no real place to call home. Their closest relationships were within the band, with Cecil as their leader, taking them from place to place in search of their next club, bar, or hall. Nothing was certain for them. Their existence depended on the skill of their manager in finding a venue to market their talent and expanding their audience by searching for a new place to be showcased. The young City Stars were playing 4 or 5 nights a week, covering the top 20 songs for their gig. Music had become his life, his guitar, his lover. There were many times that Ian had awakened only to find his guitar cradled in his arms. It had opened up an exciting life for him. His whole world was playing rock and roll. Nothing else mattered. Nothing. He was even earning more money than both of his parents put together, doing what he loved to do, yet he was again growing restless. Then, around 1974, Cecil Thompson unwittingly altered the course of Ian's life forever. The Bay City Rollers had hit it big in the UK and were on their way to Ireland. Cecil arranged to have the Young City Stars touring with the Rollers as their opening act, not only in Ireland but for shows in the UK as well. The Young City Stars were moving into the future on the coattails of the 70s' biggest pop band. But, even with the possibilities, Ian knew that the group he was in wasn't going to be able to ride the wave of success off of another band for much longer. Something had to change. The conversation between the Rollers and the Young City Stars consisted of no more than a passing hello, how are you? But Tam Patton took an interest in Ian. Tam was the manager of the Bay City Rollers, a position that he had been warned not to take by others. He had invited other managers, successful managers in Edinburgh, to have a listen to the group, and they had promptly told him not to take the position of their manager. They said the Bay City Rollers would never make it and advised to waste his time. Tam looked at that pronouncement not as a prophecy to failure, but as a challenge that he was more than willing to take on. He was more determined than ever to take the group to the top, and he stood behind them from day one, even taking on a second job, working on a potato delivery truck to make ends meet. It was only another step up the ladder for him and the Bay City Rollers when they moved into Ireland to tour. Tam knew that the Rollers were soon to be on their way as new pop icons, but he was always on the lookout for new talent. He wasn't intending on starting another group anytime soon, if ever, but he didn't let an opportunity slip by him to see what other bands had to offer, and Ian had drawn his interest. Tam knew that he was young, only a teenager, but Ian had definite talent and a certain drive, a passion for music. That's what caught Tam's attention. That's what prompted Tam into learning more about the young Irishman. From that time on, Ian began taking trips to Scotland at Tam's request. While visiting there, he met Pat McGlynn, the same man who would ironically be the person to replace him years later in the Rollers. Both Ian and Pat were mere teenagers enraptured with the allure of stardom that was a colorful aura surrounding Tam's home. A steel gate guarded the entrance to Tam's estate. Security cameras surrounded the grounds, and even barbed wire had to be placed on the top of the walls to keep out the overly rambunctious fans that would find their way in there. Even though Ian and Pat weren't part of the Rollers at the time, it still sent a charge to them to be on the estate with young fans screaming out each time someone glanced, a passing shadow within the house. The friendship that was started between Ian and Pat was one that would endure throughout the years, even after the Bay City Rollers legend faded. It was the unexpected bonus to spending time at the manager's estate. And yet, even after many hours of conversation, neither of them had any idea why the invitation had been repeatedly extended to them to stay there, or that they were being groomed to be the next Bay City Roller. But that soon became clear. Tam was a man who liked to have all his bases covered. The Bay City Rollers had the pristine image of 5 alcohol-free, drug-free, milk-drinking, virginal lads that every parent would welcome into their homes for their daughters. But that was far from the truth. The Rollers had been plagued with one problem after another from the moment the band first formed. It was almost like a curse that would overshadow the rest of their career, no matter what variation of members were in the group. And no one was more aware of the eternal difficulties than Tam Patton. Tam wanted to make sure that there was always someone waiting in the wings to jump in at a moment's notice, someone that could play but would also fit into the image that he had created for the band as well. As a result, he kept a watchful eye out for the next lad who would be given the opportunity to join the group. It was on one of these occasions that Ian had received a phone call from Tam. It was the mid-70s, and in Downpatrick, a private phone line in homes wasn't very common. Tam had to place his phone call to the local coin box in Ian's neighborhood, and was left to wait while someone ran to collect Ian. Once Ian was on the line, Tam asked him if he could make a trip to Scotland the following day. He was quite elusive about the reasons and the urgency behind the request, but he was adamant that Ian was needed and even had the flight reservations made. Once Ian arrived at Tam's home, he was stunned to find out that he was meant to be the replacement for Les McEwen, the lead singer of the Bay City Rollers. Les was there, dressed in a suit and tie, because he was going to court that day on a reckless driving charge. Everyone was concerned that he may be going to jail, and that was why Ian had been called. If Les had gone to jail, Ian would have taken his place then and there. Not that I'm in any way comparable to Les as a vocalist, by no means, because I'm not, Ian explains as he thinks back on that day long ago. But maybe I would have evolved, and I guess that the rest of the guys in the band thought that too, otherwise they wouldn't have asked me. Whether or not Ian would have evolved into the lead singer that everyone hoped he could be wasn't to be discovered at that moment. Les was found not guilty, and Ian returned to Ireland, put on the back burner once more. But before Ian left, Tam spoke with him about staying in Scotland. Tam insisted that there was a slot for him in the Rollers, but Ian declined. He still had a job in Ireland with the Young City Stars, and he was earning good money. He simply couldn't wait around in the hopes of an opening in the band. He wanted to play, and if that meant returning home, then so be it. It wasn't until Ian returned to the Young City Stars that he realized that earning good pay simply wasn't enough anymore. Even playing guitar wasn't enough. He was becoming increasingly restless, being forced to play other performers' music. He wanted to introduce his own compositions. But out on the circuit, the band was expected to play top 20 hits, cover songs, and nothing more. He was becoming bored with playing and frustrated that no one would give him the opportunity to present his own material. There was nothing worse for Ian than to feel like a captive. He could still remember the faces of the people from his hometown with burning clarity. The stoical life that they followed left their expressions blank, as if there were nothing but robots going through the motions of their existence without care or want for any change. That was what had pushed him into choosing music. It was as much an escape as it was a passion. Every melody that would pass through his fingers onto the guitar strings opened up new possibilities for him, a new avenue to explore. But he was stagnating once more, staying with the Young City Stars. It was like his hometown all over again. It was that discontent that spurred Ian into calling Tam to see if he knew anything about what was going on with a band called Bilbo Baggins. He had heard that the group was having problems finding a new lead singer, and Tam was able to confirm that for him. Then suggested to Ian that he fly over for an audition. Since Ian wasn't at all happy with the fact that the Young City Stars were idling, depending on other bands' material to earn a living, he was ready to move on to the next stage of his life. And move on he did. Ian was sitting in his room on Tam's estate playing his guitar when Tam walked in. Eric Faulkner and Woody Wood of the Bay City Rollers had dropped by and asked if Ian would want to go with them to the recording studio. A stunned expression crossed Ian's face, combined with a look of awe at the prospect. He had played as an opening act for the Rollers, but he had never actually played with any of the guys. He managed to babble out something in the affirmative to Tam, then he was on his way to the studio in Woody's Range Rover. Eric started questioning Ian almost as soon as they climbed into the vehicle, and realized from Ian's confused expression that Tam hadn't said anything to him about their sojourn to the studio. "You don't know what's happening here, do you?" asked Eric. When Ian responded with a shake of his head, Eric and Woody laughed, but no explanations were forthcoming. Once in the studio, Eric stationed himself in the control booth, where he put on the backing track for Money Honey, a Faulkner and Wood composition recorded by the Bay City Rollers, then asked Ian to sing the lead vocals. Still a bit confused about why he had been put in the studio by himself, Ian asked if he was doing an overdub type of thing. When Eric responded with a yes, Ian started to get excited. He could hardly believe that Eric and Woody were taking the time to help him make an audition tape for the position of lead singer in Bilbo Baggins, but he was thrilled at the same time. Ian put his whole heart into the song. "Money Honey, you ain't got no respect, snide like a fox, yeah, just to see what you can get." Ian watched the window of the control booth high above, where he could see Eric getting into the song as much as he was. Eric's head was nodding in rhythm with the song, and a huge smile dawned his face. Ian knew that he was doing well. The audition tape was going to be brilliant. Once everything was over, Ian wandered back out into the car while Eric and Woody had a chat with Tam. That was one night that Ian was going to remember for a long time to come. He was still jazzed from the tracks he recorded, humming the songs over again to himself as he stood in the parking lot waiting for the guys to come out. He was still on that high when Tam joined him once more. "Your voice is really good," Tam told him. "I guess you're in the band." Ian nearly fell to the ground with that quiet announcement. He had no idea that he had been auditioning for the Bay City Rollers when he walked into the studio. He didn't even know that there was a position available for him. But it seemed that Alan Longmuir, the Rollers' bass player, was leaving the group for personal reasons, and that gave Ian the opportunity of a lifetime. Everything became distorted as he tried to grasp the concept of joining the Bay City Rollers. They were an international success, and he hadn't even dared to dream that he would be part of the group. It was everything he had ever wanted and more. The offer had been a total surprise for him. He was completely stunned. He wasn't even sure if he had responded to Tam, or if he was even supposed to. Tam's announcement had been a statement of fact, not a question. The position was there, and as far as he was concerned, Ian was going to fill it. Peter Powell happened to be there when Ian received the news. Peter was a Radio 1 DJ with Radio Luxembourg and a big advocate of the Rollers on his show. So the news of a new roller was a major scoop for him. Peter turned to Tam and asked if he could be the first to congratulate Ian. "Yeah, I guess you can," Tam responded. "It's official." Ian Mitchell was now a Bay City Roller.